Okay, let's continue with comma rules. So rule number 3, you use a comma when you introduce information. So anytime you begin a sentence with an introductory word, phrase, or clause, that information has to be followed by a comma. So a word that you might use at the beginning of a sentence as an introduction could be an adverb, for example, like, however, his plan was unsuccessful. Or it could be a person's name, like, Dad, could I have some money? An example of an introductory phrase could be a prepositional phrase, like, in the meantime, I suggest that you concentrate on passing your exams. Now, some people might argue that you don't always need a comma after an introductory phrase, and this is true, as long as the meaning is clear and the reader would not be confused. Now, if you look at this example, on Friday I have an exam, you don't necessarily need a comma there because there would be no confusion as to the meaning of the phrase and the rest of the sentence. But if you look at the next example, to John, Smith was always polite. If you removed that comma after John, you could really confuse your reader and change the grammar of the sentence. Now, an introductory clause could be a dependent clause at the beginning of a sentence, like, although they had never met, they were familiar with each other's work. If you want more information on using a dependent clause as an introduction at the beginning of a sentence, check out the video on complex sentences. Okay, so rule number 4 is using a comma when you insert information into a sentence. Generally speaking, anytime you interrupt a sentence by adding a word, a phrase, or a clause, that information should be between commas. So again, a common word to insert into a sentence would be an adverb, like, students, therefore, should be allowed to use cell phones in class. Or it could also be additional information like a person's name for clarification. My neighbors, John and Kim Sullivan, are both professors at the college. All right. Now, similarly, you can use a phrase or a clause in the middle of a sentence. The film was, in my opinion, a waste of 2 hours. Or, his brother, who had been a vegetarian for years, refused to come to family barbecues. Now, with the final example, if you're using commas, just be sure that the relative clause is what we call a non-defining clause and not defining. Now, those are the 4 big rules, but we have a couple more quick rules that I want to go over with you. So, the next one is in an address. You want to separate the street from the city, from the state, from the country, from the postal code with a comma. For example, he wrote to the editor of the Vancouver Sun, 200 Granville Street, Vancouver, BC, V6C 3N3. Similarly, when you're writing a date, you want to separate the day from the year, like, he died on August 18th, 1978. And finally, you want to use a comma when you use quotation marks. Generally, you want to use the comma to separate what is spoken from the person who is doing the speaking. So, as an example, tomorrow, he said, there will be a test. Or one more example, he said, review Unit 8 this evening. So there you have it. Those are the comma rules. If you want to do some practice exercises on the comma, follow the link at the end of this video.